Hello and welcome back to another episode of Wired In, a Contact podcast. Today we are talking about the real cost of AV projects, and the subtitle here is The Price You Pay When It Doesn't Work. And so what we're talking about here is something we touched on in previous episodes, but that there is a total cost of ownership when you think about building a large-scale premium AV project within your space, whether you're a hospital, a school, so on. And there are functions of this space, of course, that serve a business purpose, and it is very important to get that right. And even though it looks like a project could be $500,000, $1 million or more, think about the total cost of ownership over the lifetime of that space and the lifetime of the technology and the team and the frustrations that you'll experience. And it will start to add up and make it clear why it is good to spend the money up front. So you, Marques, we have talked about this before, and you have a lot of experience in this area, a lot of wisdom, if I can say that, where you have done this a time or two in different configurations of what projects will look like in different spaces for different organizations at different price points. And you're saying, let's go all in. Think about it. So, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but that's what I'm picking up. So talk to me a little bit about the price you pay when it doesn't work. So you have mentioned like different hidden costs with cheaper solutions. We talked about Amazon last time, buying these little, $8 HDMI cords. But scale that up. Talk about an overall big project of some of these hidden costs that you've experienced if you scrimp.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of this really starts with your actual users, right? So if we just talk on the people side of the equation, if you're trying to, we'll say value engineer it, or you're trying to go with, lower tiers and get your costs down, what ends up happening, and we've seen this in the field several times, you may put a solution out. So imagine you have a brand new building, school, whatever it is. And on day one, you're experiencing failures, right? Mm-hmm. So most folks, you may have an IT team, you have an AV team. They have roles and responsibilities and things they're doing throughout their daily jobs. Now imagine that in your brand new conference room, every morning, an AV or IT professional has to come by to reboot it. Is it working? There's a failure. The calendar isn't working correctly. Oh, wait, the room is down. I have to move it. Okay, well, now that person's job has shifted from whatever their daily roles are to now I have to check on this meeting room every single day and spend 30 minutes to an hour trying to troubleshoot or figure out what's happening, especially in the case of if you have a hardware failure or something like that. Okay, well, that's one room. Now, if you multiply that across a campus or across a large building where you have 5, 10, 20 spaces, that becomes immediately unmanageable, right? Mm-hmm. So now your whole team is being taxed with, hey, why is this always failing? So it's really about, did I put in a quality solution from the very beginning that I know will last? So that's your head count when it comes to employees that actually service and work on the gear. Well, on the flip side of that, think about your users. So if I have to come into a room, I have a meeting scheduled to start at 8:30 a.m. I don't believe in 8 a.m. meetings, so we'll say 8:30. I walk in the room and it's not working, right? I can't connect. The display won't turn on. Something's happening. So now as a user, I'm going to be frustrated. I'm going to be stressed out. I'm calling IT. I'm calling AV. I'm calling someone, right? I'm saying, hey, I need help right now. Well, immediately my stress level is up. Well, now the stress level of whoever's coming to help me is probably going to rise a little bit because they're sensing, that, hey, this has to happen right now. And these are really, small examples of this, but it really happens every day. And so now that user, they've lost confidence in the room. So now they don't want to use that room. They want to try to schedule other rooms. So now you're having competing rooms, or they're trying to kind of come up with their own solution. And in some extreme cases, I've seen users start to take rooms apart and really break things. And it's like, okay, wow, like, please don't do this. This is not the answer. Trust me.
Yes.
But all that happens because people just want their technology to work, right? If I hit the power button, I want something to come on. I want something to happen. I don't want to worry about the ins and outs of it. I don't want to have to hit 5 buttons to make one thing happen, right? And it just, all of that goes into the thinking because it's the hardware you're selecting, it's the manufacturers you're choosing to work with, it's the team that's doing the programming. Is it something that's very intuitive? When you're doing your graphical user interfaces, does it just make sense naturally how I'm going to navigate this? And all of that, all of the talent and the expense that goes along with developing talent and retaining it, that's what, makes companies appear more expensive, less expensive, But all of that really shines through in the end product, because now I can launch a space that I expect to have, plenty of uptime, 99.95 or whatever metric you want to go by. And then also a user can just walk in and it makes sense right away. I walk in, I know how to use this. It is very intuitive and very simple. And then there's also flexibility, right? Maybe I walk in, I want to connect with my laptop. Maybe some days I'm just running in with my phone. I just want to connect through my phone. I just want my phone to control the room. How do I do this and how do I make it happen? And all of that just is where you get into these premiums as far as top tier companies that really know the ins and outs. They're used to different user experiences, different IT environments. IT and AV are connected at the hip at this point. So anything we're doing in the space, hey, do we talk to IT to make sure their network supports this? Because you don't want to roll something out and then the user can't use it because, oh, wait, IT blocks this port. This isn't accessible. This is not how our network is partitioned. So all of that goes into the overall experience. And I tell folks all the time, our brand is really about expertise and experience. That's what we sell. All the boxes you can buy anywhere. But when it comes to expertise and really knowing and deep diving, that's where companies like ours really shine.
What I'm hearing is there's like basically two types of costs. Correct me if I'm wrong here, but what I'm hearing is there's frustration on one side. It's just annoying to this thing not work, and I got 1,000 examples of that just on the personal side. My phone doesn't. I was dealing with this yesterday with the update that iOS came out with, and I just couldn't do the thing I was trying to do. It's so frustrating. But then there's also the business case of it that you actually can turn some of that frustration into an actual line item on a budget. So if you brought up, for example, if you have that employee who's supposed to be doing 100 other things, and every morning he's got to come in and do this, and it takes 15 minutes maybe, and it's not a big deal, quote unquote, it's 15 minutes. But that adds up, that compounds a lot, especially if you have a larger space like you're talking about. And so there is a real business case for some of this stuff. And if you don't consider those line items that do start to add up, it can be a big deal. And I want to say too, I want to empathize with a listener, a person who's putting the budget together, putting the dream together for what their AV project looks like. I'm a business owner. You're a business owner. You try to cut costs if you can. It helps, obviously, the profitability of the company. It helps bring, interest payments down over the long-term $500,000 project. Like, I get it. But think long-term and think holistically about the whole project. Is that way I'm framing those two types of costs? Does that track with kind of how you've experienced it?
Yeah, 100%. I never want to lose sight of this is a huge investment some of these folks are making in these technologies. So, I don't want to be cavalier and saying like, oh, just spend more, because that's not always the answer, right?
Exactly, right, yeah.
I mentioned it before, but you don't need gold-plated HDMI cables. That's a bridge too far for me. You don't need that. But it is the cost of, we focused on, an employee experience, things like that. But we support certain industries where there's an even deeper cost in terms of you could have lives on the line. We support hospitals, medical centers. We do a lot for command and control and monitoring centers, 911 emergency centers. If something goes down in those spaces that are manned, 24/7, 365, that can have an extreme negative impact on the community itself. So it's, I focused on just the corporate style, it's conference room, but there are plenty of spaces where it has to be up, it has to be running. And, that's not the time to try to save a few dollars on the front end, because if you have a premature failure or something, that cascades. Now the room is down. Now folks are scrambling. Now they're trying to bring it back up. Now, I have to do an advanced replacement. I have to try to get a new part. All these things, can just cascade from that. And it could just start with, hey, this wasn't the right choice for, how often we need to use this. Does it need to run continuously? Just this week, I went out to a venue. Beautiful venue. Great views around the city. Pretty awesome. And as I walked around, I was kind of doing a walk for one of our clients because they were doing a dinner meeting. As I looked around, I noticed there was all these components that just weren't quite working, right? There was a display that wouldn't turn on. All right, well, I looked at it, it's like, well, no knock on them, but this came from a big box store. I won't say any names. I said, it's not a commercially rated product. It's not for outdoor use. You probably save some money, but it's already failed. It hadn't been outside for years. I know that. They were trying to use the projector in one of the rooms. Oh, they couldn't connect it to the wall because the wall plate wasn't working. Oh, wait, the control system is also not working. Well, this is a space that's a revenue generating space. So how does that work if you have a revenue generating space that you're going to rent out but the technology doesn't work. It can't really do all that needs to happen. So there's all these use cases in all these different industries where we see it all the time. And when I walked through the room, I said, ooh, I don't have high hopes for this. Is what I told the client at the time, and said, hey, this is just, they went with a lower tier brand that has a higher failure rate. That's one of the things that comes with it. And then they saw it in real time, and it kind of opened their eyes to some of this discussion we're having today of, hey, this is why this really matters on the front end.
So what I'm hearing, to frame it this way maybe, is there's two types of costs. One is just frustration. Everybody knows what that's like. And then the other is actual hard cash shows up in a line item on a budget that you actually do need to plan for, that typically you wouldn't think of in budgets, the time that IT person has to be in the room, et cetera. But then there's two types of impacts maybe. And one is, and maybe this is particular to certain types of industries like you're getting at. One is like an impact on the actual, like in a hospital, the actual impact on a patient's life or their health, or in something failing within a venue, like you're saying, which can hurt in two different ways. One is like the brand premium, like you're supposed to be a premium brand, and now you are not going to be perceived as that premium brand. But then there's the actual like cost of like or impact of like a person's life. Is that a great way to frame it? Maybe where it's like, it's like brand impact and then real impact on people's lives and their day-to-day functions. Is that
100%?
Fair? Yeah.
Because the severity of the impact can change based on the industry you're in, right? If I'm, a teacher at elementary school, is it annoying and obnoxious and interrupting my day if the technology fails? Yes. That's not the same as a 911 call center that's trying to monitor a storm situation in real time, and all of a sudden a video wall goes down. Those are, dramatic differences into the impact it's going to have, to other folks involved, not just with the technology side, but who are you trying to support through this technology?
Okay. That's really helpful. There's this, as you were talking, I was pulling up this blog that has made a big impact on me, and I've just been obsessed with it lately. And it's called, I want to get this right because I want to give attribution where it's due. It's called The Work is Never Just the Work. And it's by a guy named Dave Stewart. And it's this really fascinating like analysis that he did. He's a software engineer, and he analyzed like all of these projects over the last year that he had completed, and wondering like, what the heck happened to my budgets on these things or these scopes? And so I want to lay this out, and I want to see if this is tracking with kind of how you're thinking about some of these things. And I think it'll help listeners kind of frame up like, these are all the costs that are going into this thing. So he frames it this way. There's the work around the work, which is like meetings, reviews, project management. There's the work to get to the work, which is research, experimentation, things like that. There's the work before the work, configuration, setup, infrastructure. And then there's the work. There's the actual like thing that you guys are implementing and building, the product, the design, the testing, and so on. Then there's the work between the work, which is debugging, refactoring, maintenance. There's the work beyond the work, which is changes, omissions, nice to have, maybe some scope creep. There's the work outside the work, which is surprises, contingencies, disasters. And then there's the work after the work, the hosting, deployment, security support, updates, fixes. And what he argues is that when you have a budget in mind for a particular project, and I think this extrapolates to different things I've read about, whether it's a highway, a building, or a software project, you can double that project budget and timeline and then double it again. And that's probably more accurate and realistic about what you might be actually investing into this project. Does that frame make sense to you? Does that match with your experience and having been doing this for a couple of decades now?
I'll say, wow, you said his name was Dave Stewart?
Yeah, Dave Stewart.
I will have to check that out because he nailed it. He should come on over to the AV design and integration side because he has nailed it. That is exactly what happens. When people ask us sometimes about, well, why do you need so much project management time? Okay, well, I have to walk the site. I have to see what's going on with the construction. Yep. We have to, gather documentation. We have to brief the teams. We have to, monitor the project as it's happening in real time. We can get ready to close out the project. Are all the resources assigned to do the programming for it, to debug it, just to go in and train the users? We have a multi-room system throughout the whole building. Do your final closeout, deliver all of your code and your paperwork. Like all of that surrounds, what happens on the project. And that's just one role on a project. On a project, you'll have your PM, you'll have your account manager, you have your lead, you have your rec integrator, you have your field engineer, you have all these roles, and their work is all very similar to that process.
Yeah.
So that's what ends up happening. All these hours go into that project to make it become a reality. And people think sometimes like, wow, that seems really high. Well, here's all the work that's required. And just to keep up with the client, right? Just to have meetings. When you're doing a construction project, you're going to typically have, a weekly OAC meeting. So that means every hour I'm meeting with the owner, the architect, any contractors, and we're meeting, talk about whatever's happening. That's just 1 hour a week for the lifetime of this build, however long it may be. So if you're building for 6 months, just do that math right there. Yep. So yeah, he hit a home run on that one because that perfectly encapsulates, an audiovisual design integration project.
Okay, fascinating. I'll share this blog with you afterwards. I've been obsessed with it lately because it's like, you're coming in and thinking, okay, I'm probably about to spend $100,000 on this AV project. And it's like, it may be actually more realistic thinking about, again, lifetime of the project, let's say 10 years or whatever, out of all the benefits that you're going to get out of it and all the work to set it up. You should probably think about investing about $400,000. And he argues, I'm not putting words in your mouth or his mouth, but I think he's arguing that's probably a more realistic view of what it's actually going to cost to do this right, to do it well, and to minimize those frustrations and those long-term costs that you'll experience on your budget.
I'll say the only difference for that is we won't double and double again, but what ends up happening is we'll have the initial amount. And even our initial, like our goal, this is just our philosophy at our company, is we don't want any surprises. So going into the project, we're trying to look at all those things he's mentioning and trying to capture all of those hours, which means there could be sticker shock because immediately it's like, oh, wait, you're 30% higher.
Yeah.
Probably. I tell people all the time, we're never the cheapest company out there. I said, but at the same time, it's a rarity that we're issuing a change order, that we have to come back and rescope or do something because we spent all this time to try to capture as much as we could to make sure we're giving you an honest look at it. But the rest of it is spot on because, yearly there's maintenance, there's things that are going to happen for the long term, life cycle of whatever we're doing, right? Because you do want this to last. I tell people all the time, you want to be able to get, 5 to 7 years out of a system. It's no different than computers, right? I tell folks, your IT refresh at your company is probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 5 years.
Okay.
AV is really, we're talking about custom built PCs, essentially. That's what they are. They're custom PCs performing a very specific function, but they're basically computers. So if you think about how that matches up with IT, then you say, yeah, I want to refresh my, AV lifecycle somewhere, 5, 7 years, something like that. We have a few clients that have stretched it out to 10, sometimes 12. And I say, hey, you're winning. If you get it 10 years, you have won the game and you're doing really well. And some manufacturers can do that. They won't advertise it, but there's some manufacturers out there that, they can just run continuously and we'll see these old boxes and we're like, oh man, that thing is still running. That's pretty cool.
I've heard that with people in their MacBooks. Sometimes people have like 10-year-old MacBooks or something that just keep going, if you're not running it too hard. Oh,
I have a MacBook right now that is at 10 years old. I laugh about it because I need a new one. But, and I always tell people, they think I'm anti-Apple. I'm not anti. I just exist in a different space where I work on Windows. I'll be in, iOS projects I do on Linux sometimes. So I'm never just married to one thing. But yes, I'm in that refresh.
That's funny.
10 years.
That's funny. Okay, good. Okay, so talk to me a little bit. I'm glad you touched on that 5-year refresh rate. I think that's something important to think about when you're thinking about building one of these projects or dreaming about it even. What is that process like at 5 years? Let's say, you install this, $400,000 or $500,000 project, beautiful space, world-class facility, and then that kind of 5-year mark starts approaching. What happens then? What's the conversation at that point?
Yeah, for us, is a lot of it is trying to be prepared. So we have a support team, and when we're in a support contract, they're coming out, they're doing preventative maintenance, vacuuming out filters and changing things out and giving reports back to say, hey, you're at 3 years, you're at 5 years, whatever you may be, because we want to have that conversation early, right? We want to start talking to you to say, okay, everything may be running fine, and we hope it is. But realistically, once you eclipse that 5-year mark, you're going to be out of any kind of manufacturer warranty or anything like that. And that's when we start saying, hey, let's plan a cycle or a phase so that we can start, refreshing things, because I'm sure no one wants to refresh all the rooms at once. It's typically not practical, right?
Yeah,
because you have, they have to be used. So what we started looking at then is saying like, okay, let's plan this. How do you want to refresh the spaces? What needs to happen? And our whole thing is about preventing downtime, right? Because you could say, hey, I want to stretch this out until it fails. There are some folks that are like that. But then what happens when it does fail, right? Now there's time to reconfigure, order new parts and pieces, do all these things. So your downtime isn't 1 or 2 hours. Your downtime could be 1 or 2 weeks, depending on, what's happening in the technology world. And when I say technology world, I can roll the clock back to when we transitioned from analog to digital, right? There were some rooms still running analog. Well, as newer rooms were going digital, folks that were kind of just trying to hold on when they eventually had failures, we're not replacing one piece or one part. We're doing overall replacements of the entire system because now we had to bring you forward into the digital realm, whereas you were analog before. So some of this, you have to look at just what's happening in the world around you. Mm-hmm. But generally, that's what we want to do is just prepare and say, hey, let's roadmap, like what needs to happen. And it's not just refreshing the technology itself. Have your use cases changed, because how you use a space may change from year 1 to year 5, year 6. Completely normal and acceptable, and you would think it might, because again, there's new software, there are new developments. Teams wasn't really that big of a thing if I roll the clock back 10 years. I don't know that anyone's using it like that. When COVID hit, Zoom took off, Teams came behind it. WebEx had been around for a really long time, but that changed how people work. And so it went from, in office spaces having, a presentation style conference room. Every room we outfit now is video conference capable. Like, I can't even imagine doing a room now that can't support a video conference. And moving all this video and doing all these things. So all of that is part of a road mapping process, because again, you don't really want a huge surprise, and you can kind of forecast what's going to happen, what needs to change out, what parts of a system need to change, and you just lay it all out and say, hey, here's what needs to happen. Here's how you can do it. Because again, our goal is to make sure you can avoid that critical failure or that failure at the wrong time. So a story, it's not really funny because someone probably had a really negative consequence from this, but to help people understand it, I always think about Steve Jobs. It was when the iPhone was coming out. And I remember there was a presentation, and there's one of the presentations he was giving where he tried to show something and it didn't show up on screen correctly.
Yeah, I've seen this, yeah.
Yep, and it happened to Bill Gates with Microsoft once. And what people don't understand is that is very real. We do some rooms where they support town halls from CEOs. If the CEO is trying to kick off a town hall session that's happening with the users inside the room as well as being streamed outbound remotely, and all of a sudden it fails, that is a problem for everyone involved. You just embarrass the CEO. It typically doesn't go well. So that's when we start talking about these refreshes, like, hey, our goal is to not have just impromptu downtime. We want to make sure we refresh it out, keep it running, keeping it in good use, so that way, it's going to be stable when you do need to use it.
I drive a 2017 Honda CR-V with 150,000 miles and a headlight out, and I've said before, I'm just going to drive that thing into the ground. That's probably not good advice for a large AV project that's got a lot of business functions, but I hear you. Yeah, it's good to plan that out and plan ahead. Okay, real briefly, what is the takeaway you want listeners to bring from this episode? If they're hearing this, what would you say is, like, if you're considering a project like this and dreaming big and want to do things right, what's their next step? What should they be thinking about?
Number one, I think I say it often, bring on a partner early. Let's talk through it. Let's understand, what is your vision? What is your dream? Don't get caught up in the upfront cost, right? That's a trap. Don't immediately go into VE mode, cut this, cut that, because you don't want to start off with a space you're not happy with. But then also, you want to pay for it once, not twice, right? You don't want to, make choices for lower tier brands or cut corners. And so now, instead of making that 5-year mark, now you only make, 18 months, 24 months, and you're going to have to replace it. So don't pay for something twice when you can pay for it once.
I like that. It makes me think of I have an old colleague, he said something very wise, where he said, we always have time, or we never have time to do it right, but we always have time to do it twice. And I thought of that. That's a great way to think about it in a budget case too,
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, great. Well, Marques, thank you for this wisdom. Thank you for your experience. I know you got the scars to show, like, this is how you should be doing this and thinking about this, because you've lived through and you've worked with clients in a lot of different ways. And so I appreciate your perspective as always. And I hope this has been useful for folks thinking about their product coming up. So we have, as I've mentioned before, we have a lot of exciting things coming to contek.com. So please be on the lookout at kontek.com and get in touch with the team and hear a lot more about their wisdom and insight on this project. And we will see you next time here on the show.
Awesome.